We're doing the lecture series entitled A Catastrophe But Not a Holocaust. Those who were here yesterday, I think, started getting an idea what I'm talking about. The ordeal of the Orthodox Jews in the First World War. Tonight is the third of 5 lectures. It's called Yekes to the Rescue, Jewish Politics in German Occupied Eastern Europe, 1915-1918. And like I say, since the hour's late, let's jump right into it. As we've seen from yesterday, the Germans, because I'm just picking up where I left off, the Germans and the Austro-Hungarians ruled Poland and Lithuania from 1915 to 1918. So that's 3 years. That's a big area because of the battles that we talked about yesterday. So let's get right into it. All right, here's the, again, mirrored that armpit I showed you yesterday, right? So here's the area, roughly speaking, of Poland, totally taken over by the German army, and up here is Lithuania, and yesterday, and is as far as they got for the first half of the war. They took over Poland, Lithuania, and they stopped at Belarus and Ukraine, to use modern terminology. They're bogged down. Later in the war, they took over to Belarus and Ukraine. So, not many people know this, although it's no secret, but Germany defeated Russia in the First World War, and the Russians surrendered. It's called the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, early in 1918, when the Russians were so bad off. By that time was Lenin. He just take whatever you want just to stop it. And then the Germans said, okay, in that case, we want the whole old kingdom of Poland. I want Lithuania and Latvia and Estonia and Ukraine and Belarus and Poland. And thank you very much. And Lenin very smartly said, okay. So in the course of 1918, the Germans took over the Ganze business, but that came later. For the first half of the war, it was pretty static, as what I just showed you. Now, Poland and Lithuania had 5 million Jews. That's what I keep coming back to. This is a big thing in Jewish history. About 80% of whom at that time were still from, although that's an issue we're going to talk about tonight. What does it mean to be from? Do you have a political self-consciousness or not? If you don't, we call that traditionalist. If you do, the historians call it Orthodox. As we shall see, if you don't mind somebody who's not like you representing you, then you're traditionalist. If you say, no, I want my own newspaper that looks like me. I want my own elected representatives that looks like me. I want a federation that looks like me. And then it's called Orthodox. It's a matter of political consciousness raising. So now, if the Germans took this over, as a matter of rational calculation of self-interest, the Germans and the Austrians had to figure out a policy of what to do. In other words, how does one make intelligent use of resources? This is where Koheles and Machiavelli come in, correct? Because if you don't have, no. If you're poor like most of us, so we don't have the time to worry about these big issues. You got to go to work every day. You got to make your salary. You got to come home. By the time the day's over, you're wiped out, correct? Raise your hand if you're wiped out at the end of the day, right? So that's called normal. Thank God, there's a family, there's this, there's that, and the other. You have time to think about big issues. Now, what if you hit the jackpot? Right? What if that lucky waitress that won $500 million in the Powerball, and she's 20 years old or 25 years old? What the heck does she do with the rest of her life? Then you need philosophy. And if it's a political question, you want to read Machiavelli. Simply because he'll try to show you, how do you judge what is your self-interest? Don't do things that will not be good for you. How many ball players win $1 zillion and then they blow it all away in a year because about 25 Rolls Royces and 50 this and that and the other? It wasn't a rational. Yeah. So the Germans, if they occupied this area, so the question then becomes, what do we do with it in such a way that be good for Germany? There's nothing wrong with that. Just question how ruthless you are. They had to figure out a policy also towards the population. They have millions and millions of Polacks and Lithuanians now, which they never had before. Now, it's not Hitler. Hitler would simply say, kill everybody and take everything they got. That was his policy, very simple. But if you're not that brutal, if you're not murderous, then what do you do? Didn't General MacArthur have this problem when he tried to run Japan? Didn't the Americans have this problem when they tried to run Germany? Didn't we screw up royally in Iraq a few years ago because we didn't have a plan? We know this, okay? So the question becomes, what is the smart way of going about, occupying, administering, and exploiting, and I don't mean exploiting necessarily in a bad way. exploiting the territories, the considerable territories, and the considerable population, which is now under your control. How do you do that? So we're dealing with Ludendorff, not Hitler. And later on, after the war, Ludendorff turned extreme right-wing reactionary, extreme, and he blamed the loss of the war on the Jews, and he buddied up with Hitler to do the 1923 putsch. But he was a different guy in the war. Then he was in real life. That's Ludendorff A, not Ludendorff B. And then he was a highly rational, and he wasn't bad to the Jews at all. As a matter of fact, he had a huge staff of 10,000, of which were many, many Jews. And he recognized it because he said they got the education, they got this, that, and the other. And they're not anti-German. I'm talking about German Jews. And he was in a different place in life. Okay? So the question becomes, what's the most intelligent way for Germany to relate to and make use of the populations in the new territories? For example, they took over Poland. Should they revive Poland? Remember, Poland had been wiped out in the 1700s. There's no Polish state. Should they now make a Polish state? It's like this. Machiavelli, you got to calculate. It would be good as far as the Russians are concerned, because then all the Polacks would side with Germany as they're liberated against the Russians. On the other hand, it'd be bad for those territories that Germany still possessed that used to belong to Poland, they don't want to give up, like Posen, or that Austria parts of Austria, Galicia, which used to be part of Poland. So how do you split that difference that, I'll stir your nationalistic ambitions, but only take the part that I give you, which is exactly what they tried to do in the end. You know how that's going to work. We are experiencing this in the current negotiations with the Palestinians. Am I right or not? That's what it boils down to. So, should Lithuania be a part of Poland? It used to be long ago, but before that it wasn't. Once again, maybe you want to set up Lithuania as a separate state. Poland shouldn't get too strong. Play one off against the other. Maybe not. This, as I said before, is unique to Hellas, or philosophy, or an intelligent plan which answers your rational needs. Not everybody's good at that. I'll tell you again, you and I, most of us, are not that rich that we can sit back and just speculate what we want to do with all our vast resources. But somebody is in that situation, and they hire experts if they know what they're doing to try to advise them. In addition to the Poles and Lithuanians, Jews. You got 5 million of them. If you're the German generals, you can't miss the Jews wherever you go, all over Poland and Lithuania. You always run into these people. That's what they kept saying in their book. What the heck is this? I thought it was Poland. I mean, I knew there were Jews in Poland. Everywhere. Every store. All over the countryside. Whoa, what is this? Okay? Now, this was a problem for Ludendorff and his generals, Hoffman, the smart guy. What do you do with the Jews? In other words, I'm saying again, rationally speaking, it's not Hitler. There's no plan to kill him. So how do you relate to the Jews? This is something that the German army, which ran the country, considered and, did like that for 3 years. The German government in Berlin also got involved because now it's part of the German area. And when you have the government, my friends, the government means bureaucracy. And that means the civilians, like the Chancellor of Germany here, Bettmann Hollweg. But bureaucracies, as I think we know today in America, are actually representative of group interests that are out there. Formally, they represent the government to the people, but really they represent special groups to the government. Is that true or not? Okay? We're not unfamiliar with that in Maryland. They ain't unfamiliar with that in Texas, right? The energy department belongs to the oil companies and so on and so forth, Who does the Department of Health belong to? Who does the Department of Health belong to? The insurance companies and the big pharmaceuticals, right? I'm talking real over here. So in Germany also, you have a Ministry of War, you have a Ministry of Trade, you have a Ministry of... They represent the lobbying groups that are out there. I repeat, Germany was a democracy of a certain sort. Okay? So bureaucracies, as I just said before, represent different interest groups. So there are many. You got the German industrialists, you got the German agricultural sector, you got the army, you got this, you got the Jews. That's one of them. I'm talking about the German Jews. It's not the only one. There are 500,000 Jews in Germany. But the 500,000 Jews in Germany, generally speaking, were middle class or better, and included a lot of highly educated people and some people with money. And those including some big shots. Some of the biggest businessmen in Germany, you'll be shocked to hear, were Jewish. Kaiser Wilhelm was a big anti-Semite whose best friend was Albert Ballin, who owned all the ship lines. the tourist line, and was a Jew. This is the old Europe of yesteryear. Who was it? George Bernard Shaw once said, how's it go? What's the difference between a Jew and a Gentile? It went something like this. You asked a Christian, what do you think of the Jews? A bunch of thieves, you can't even look at them. What about your neighbor Cohn? Different. I would trust my life to him. Now talk to a Jew. What's the story with the Jews? The chosen people. What about Cohn? A Ganov like you've never seen. Right? So, you have that kind of thing that's in the old country. Now, the German Jews, therefore, are going to be players. Bit players, perhaps, sometimes not bit players. And what happens to the Jews in Poland and Lithuania in 1915 and 1918, and that's what I want to talk about tonight, because I don't think so many people know about that. And they're bit players in the way that I would say American Jewish organizations, perhaps, are players in American government policy, at least on occasion, right? I would say in the Trump administration quite a bit. The German Jewish groups, and there are a lot of them, wanted to help Germany. So they're loyal to Germany, but they also want to help the Jews of the occupied territories. Just like an American, I don't think any American in the Federation wants to hurt America, the opposite. Agreed? But people are advocating for Israel. They say, we want good for America. We don't want bad, okay? But here the story gets complicated because German Jewry, perhaps like American Jewry, was sharply divided on matters of hashkafa. This goes back to the fact that modernity in all its various forms actually popped up originally in Germany. That's where you get the rise of reform and conservative and secular and the Wissenschaft des Judentums and the assimilationists and the pro-conversionists and the pro-Zionists, anti-Zionists, every variety you want, you'll find in the Kaiser's Germany, which is why there are a million books written by historians and social historians particularly on this period. You understand? You can find this type of Zionism and that type of anti-Zionism and so on and so forth. One divide in Germany was religious, between the Orthodox on one hand and the others on the other, what they call liberal, which is the Reform and the liberal. That was a big, bitter fight, going back to the days of Samson Raphael Hirsch and all the rest of it. He knew he was gone, and it's still there in 1914. Another divide in Germany was over Zionism. Most German Jews hated Zionism because they thought it's a treason to Germany for one reason or another. That's why when Herzl started out, he said, let's hold the first Zionist conference in Germany, in Munich, in München. And a whole bunch of rabbis, including one Orthodox rabbi, a whole bunch of rabbis, wrote a big protest in the paper. We protest this as unpatriotic, anti-German. And Herzl says, to heck with you, fine, we'll take it to Switzerland, shine, get it? These are the great rabbis of the day. That was his position. So people felt strongly about it. Traditionally, the German Jews had a complex relationship to the Jews of the East, what they call the Ostjuden, the Jews of the East. This is well known to anybody who knows anything about the past, especially before the First World War, in which they look down on them, they dress funny, they talk funny. If you're German, you know how Yiddish sounds, especially if you've Germanized yourself in the 19th century and worked hard to forget your Yiddish and learn English. We have this in America too. You don't want to introduce your cousin who speaks a broken English to your boss or something like that. You get it. You understand? Now, perhaps you should say, what, Kieran? It's how it goes. The Jews in the East dress old-fashioned. To a German Jew who was working 24/7 to try to ameliorate and end anti-Semitism, that's what they were all about in the Kaiser's Germany. So you want to act extra honest, extra careful, extra neat, and so on and so forth. The worst thing, your worst nightmare is a German Gentile should walk, into Goldberg's Bagels or Kosher Bite. Oh, you don't do that, I don't want you to see how the others go, and so on and so forth. You understand? This is the mentality. And it used to be, therefore, that the East European Jews, poor, dirty, beggars, the only time they ever come to Germany is head for money. You see them in rags, and relatively speaking, this was very typical, and even the Orthodox felt that way to some degree or another. There are a lot of funny stories along those lines. There was a Polish Jew who was in an Orthodox synagogue in Cologne and fell asleep during the speech. It could happen. And no. Wait a minute. Over there, they do the prayer for the Kaiser after the sermon. So he fell asleep through the sermon. Through the speech. All hell broke loose. He was physically thrown out of the shoulder. And so on and so on. You get what I'm saying? All this kind of bit. You have all these wild and crazy stories. There's a genre of Jewish humor, 100 years old, 120, 130 years old, exactly along these lines of the encounter between the German Jew and the Eastern European Jew. A lot of it had to do with what I just told you before, which is I don't want anybody to meet my relatives. Right? And the truth of the matter is, I don't even like the Jews I'm among. Walter Rathenau, the most important Jew in Germany, who ran the economy for the army during the 4 years, he was head of General Electric of Germany. Married to a Jew, extremely assimilated. That doesn't do justice to it. He wrote a book called Hero Israel, in which he says, why do we have to talk loud in the line, Why do we have to sit in the wrong seat at the restaurant? Why can't you just, can't everybody just fade away and stay in your house 24/7? He writes like this. And I get it. Listen, when I was in college, my one prayer, I should be the only Orthodox Jew in class, so nobody else can make a fool. You understand? Yeah. Raise your hand if you turn off the radio when somebody calls up and says, oh, you Gewalt, I can't listen to this. You understand? So just write that all across the German Empire and you get an idea of what I'm talking about. Even the frum rabbis. I'll show you something you'd be surprised at. Rabbi Shlomo Carlebach, the senior, from 100 years ago, was rabbi in Lubeck in North Germany. Frum guy and all that sort of thing, the Carlebachs. But during the war, he is really freaked out by the fact that the German soldiers are now walking in Poland and seeing the Jews dress so funny and talk so weird. And he was a frum guy. And look what he writes. Judaism will be immeasurably strengthened when the last kapot has disappeared off the face of the earth, and when Yiddish, which is no language, has ceased to exist. Okay? Now, wait a minute. And he doesn't mean, you get what I'm saying? He doesn't mean bad. That's the funny part. Right? He doesn't mean bad. He doesn't see it as an insult. It speaks volumes, doesn't it? Okay? And I'll say again, he's an Orthodox rabbi. He was a generally from guy, and so on and so forth. His son will be the Orthodox representative on the German General Staff running Poland, Rabbi Emanuel Carlebach, in 1915, 1918. Talk about a complex relationship. It's a wonderful story. I'm only going to be able to touch on a few nakudos, as they say, tonight, because this is obviously a 6-hour business, and we don't have 6 hours. But I'm hopefully whetting the appetite of people who will now undertake to go and do some independent research on your own, because you'll find an unbelievable treasure of remarkable information. Okay? Now, by the way, what would the Shlomo Carlebach say today if he saw his great-grandson? Okay. Not so well at Hebrew music. What does Carlebach's song sound like to an old Yeki from 100 years ago? Okay? Or on the other hand, not to make this too much of a caricature, the German Jews do want to help. They're good Jews, for the most of them. But the only help they could imagine was by, as you just support, civilizing the Ostjuden. That clothes is ridiculous. That way of talking is ridiculous. I want to help you. So the German Jews, generally speaking, are like Professor Higgins with My Fair Lady. That's how they see it. Of course, problem is they didn't see it that way, but they saw it that way. Now, here it gets interesting. By 1914, there were small but active Zionist groups. Most German Jews didn't approve of Zionism for a whole bunch of reasons, but there were those that did, small elite. And actually, many were intellectuals, successful businessmen. It's interesting. Orthodox, non-Orthodox, professors even. For every one, there was 10 that weren't, but I'm talking about the ones that were. And as soon as the war started, and they saw it's a war between Germany versus Tsarist Russia. And hopefully Germany will win and take over Poland and Lithuania like they did. So at the very beginning of the war, the leading Zionist in Germany, which is Max Bodenheimer, he was a buddy of Theodor Herzl. Okay? Drew up a plan and went right to the government for Jewish national rights and a grand buffer state that will be subservient to German interests. That's like this. Now I'm going to explain. Let's go to the next. The biography of his daughter, he had in mind a divide and rule strategy to benefit Germany. Make a big state. Now, by the way, it's not a dumb idea. It's just a cynical idea. Here's Germany, and here's Russia. From a wise, not smart, but wise point of view. Whenever you have a troublesome country around, the best thing you can have in the world is a buffer state. The worst thing is you want a common border. Boy, what would Trump give to have a buffer state between us and Mexico, for example? You understand? The empires of the past that were wise used buffer states. As long as Rome used buffer states, Rome went up, up, up. As soon as the Romans yielded to the HR to take over the buffer states, they went down, down, down. It's just interesting what I'm saying. America made this mistake after World War II. They bankrupted the British Empire, said, we want to take over the world. Stupid. Give the British $100 billion, leave them, let them handle all the problems of the world. Right? What does America want to be in Vietnam for? What do we want to be in the Middle East for? I mean, why? But anyway, so there would be a big buffer state consisting of the old Kingdom of Poland between Germany and Russia. You have a lot of different races in there. You have the Belarusians, the Lithuanians, the Estonians, the Latvians. They would serve as a counterbalance to the Poles. So it would be a big state, a big Poland, but don't worry, it won't be too powerful a Poland to attack Germany because there are a whole lot of minorities in there because the old Kingdom of Poland surely had a lot of different minorities located within who won't like the Poles. That's good for me because if you have a lot of minorities who don't like the Poles, you can play divide and conquer. And you have Jews, and they will hold the balance of power between the two groupings, meaning the Jews will be the one in the middle because the Lithuanians will not like the Poles because Poland wants to rule Lithuania. The Lithuanians have their own territory. Same thing for the Estonians. Same thing for the Ukrainians and the others. The one group that doesn't have any territory, the Jews. And the Jews, therefore, will be the way we, Germany, will be able to play off these groups against one another. So it's very Talmudic, so on and so forth. It didn't go anywhere. But what does it show you? A very smart Jewish German intellectual is trying to figure out a way, lishitoso, lidaito, in his opinion, to help the Jewish people at the same time as helping the Germans. Okay? And I'll throw in one more piece that we'll come to later, but I'll explain now. If you're a Zionist in Europe, you do not believe in Eastern Europe. You do not believe in one man, one vote the way we have in this country. So you're just an American citizen, and your religion is a separate matter, and you vote however you wish to vote. Rather, they advocate for cultural autonomy. That's a Achad Ha'am. And the Jews should have Hebrew-speaking things and Yiddish-speaking things and supported by the government and all that kind of business. So in this kind of a Poland, you'll have it. Because you have a lot of different people, and everybody will have their own little minority cultures, and Jews will just be one of them. Now, this is the Bodenheimer plan. He sets up something called the Komitee für den Osten, which means the Committee for the East. And hopefully, he wants to say like this: we will be the lobby group that talks to the German government on behalf of the Jewish people of Germany. So have one voice, and that's us. And we will then work out, hopefully, together with the German government, what everybody considers to be the best policy vis-a-vis the Jews. He claims to represent everybody, but here's that political consciousness business. The Orthodox, at least the politically Orthodox, say, we're not part of that. Well, he does what the Associated does in Baltimore and other places. They appoint two token Jews, Orthodox Jews. You understand? They put Herman Struck, who we'll come across later, the very famous artist, and Professor Mitvach, who was one of the very, very, very few Orthodox Jews who was a full professor in a German university. He's the only guy that knew all the African languages, like Ethiopic and things like this. When Hitler comes to power, he doesn't fire him. He's the only Jewish president he doesn't fire, because Mussolini needs his knowledge of Ethiopia. Isn't that weird? He's a Shomer Shabbos, and he will daven mincha in the middle of the university first, wash his hands. It's interesting types. So we got two Orthodox Jews. But the Orthodox said, no, you appointed these two Kohen guys. You didn't consult with us. And it's a famous story when he goes to see the German general. He says, I represent all the Jews. The German general, who knew Orthodox Jews, said, I guess, if you represent the Orthodox, why are we having this meeting on Saturday? Why did you drive here? He said, how do you know about that? So, anyway, you end up with this kind of interesting situation. As Zionists, as I told you before, they advocate for some sort of cultural Zionism, the earliest 20th century incarnation of the Haskalah, which was when a Hebrew culture supported by the German authorities within Poland and Lithuania and all that sort of thing. Hebrew schools, Yiddish-speaking, well, Hebrew-speaking schools, Hebrew literature, Hebrew, and Germany should back it. Well, this naturally provoked the Frum. I mean, the Aguda types. And the Aguda hadn't really started yet, but the ones who were going to be the Aguda. And that would be, of course, the Hirschians. Okay? Saint Raphael Hirsch advocated many things. One of the last things he did in his life was to establish a proto-Aguda organization, the Freie Vereinigung, for the Interessen for Orthodoxische Judentums, the Free Association for the Protection of the Interests of Orthodox Jewry, which means we represent ourselves, thank you very much. Okay? You guys don't know what we want. Don't tell me what I want. I'll tell me what I want. Now, that's not the only thing Hirsch did, but for right now, that's the most important point. And therefore, they had like a mini, I'll call it a mini Aguda, you know. They had the Freie Vereinigung in Germany, naturally a headquarters in Frankfurt, but they have, you know, branches all over the place. And they say like this, they says, you know, we know what's better for the Polish Jews because they're 80% from, they're like us. And the Zionists say, they're not like you, they're just traditional. In other words, you know, you have all the fights. And the German general is saying, hey, you guys make up your mind? Who am I talking to? You had the same thing in the United States of America after Israel became a state, whereupon John Foster Dulles said what? Can you please form something called the Conference of American Jewish Organizations so I don't get hit with 830 is the Aguda, 845 is the ZOA, 850 is the Mizrahi, and so on and so forth. I don't want that. And the American Jewish Committee, American Jewish Congress, Genugshein. Can you guys work it out? No, they want a united voice. But in Germany, things are pretty bitter among the Jews, and it's going to be very hard to get a united voice. The Orthodox in Germany, who were educated people, were pretty experienced by the time you get to the First World War in what I would call Stadlanut, right? In government lobbying. It's not what you think, you understand? This is Rabbi Pinchas Cohn, we'll see later on. This is Rabbi Dr. Kahn from Fulda. These guys knew Bismarck. They knew who to talk to in the government. They knew who, they made their business be friends with this prime minister here and that minister of this thing here. And by the way, who's his closest buddy? Rabbi Dr. Michael Kahn of Fulda. I kid you not. The Archbishop. Smart move. Smart move. Because he's in southern Germany as Catholic territory. You want to get something done? The Archbishop say, just do it. You understand? Here's Jakob Rosenheim when he was young. Later on founded the Aguda. He's a very active Stadlan, as you say, always in the government offices. And here's Hildesheimer, I talked about the other day, the son of Hildesheimer. These are people who have been lobbying behind the scenes, but very effectively. There shouldn't be a law against Shechita. There shouldn't be a law against Bris Milah. There should be kosher food if for soldiers in the army. And the idea over here is stille hate. You don't have to, parade this in the front scene. It's not for the blogs. Thank God they didn't exist in those days. The right word at the right time. It's not a matter of bribery. By the way, this is Germany. It's not bribery. In Russia, it's bribery. In Germany, not bribery. You have to know how to get along with people. And it's interesting that these are from rabbis, no question about it, but they all have PhDs, which means they have a certificate of Germanness, and they understand the science of dealing with people outside your own group, and differently you can get things done. It's actually very interesting. Again, I can't go into this in great detail because of time, but if you study the Orthodox lobbying of the German army and the German government for various necessities during the First World War, you'd be amazed at what they allowed. For example, I'm just going to give you one example. Jakob Rosenheim was a young man at the time of the war. The first day, this guy tells the Archbishop, don't let him be drafted because it'll be better for Germany. We need him to lead the lobbying, which was true, the lobbying efforts with foreign countries, Orthodox Jews on behalf of Germany. And they didn't draft him in the First World War. Get it? So you got to know who to do and what to what. Now, these people would say, you Zionists, you bums, or you tried to unfrom the Polish and Lithuanian Jews, you jerks. The non-from want to use the German authorities at the very beginning of the occupation to close down all the cheters. The cheder, by definition, especially in Germany, is an outrage to hygiene. Okay? I'll use terminology that you'll be familiar with from today. The Cheder is the headquarters of the measles. You know, that's the kind of language they use. Get it? It's in Germany they call it Unkultur. It's not culture. It's unculture. It's not Erziehung. It's Unerziehung. It's uneducation. They learn the wrong things. They do the wrong. There's no system to it, and all the rest of it. The Cheters were the backbone of the Frumkeit in Eastern Europe, better or worse, in 1914. And although the Yekis themselves, the German Jews I'm speaking about, are themselves post-Cheder, by the time you get to the late 1800s in Germany, you got what's called day schools, which is a different thing. They're post-Cheder, but they defend the Cheters for over there. In other words, don't you force them to change your way. Whatever happens, let it happen on its own, right, like that. It's a little bit interesting to us, a little bit like the current situation in Israel, which is what do you want to do with all the boys in the yeshiva who don't want to go in the army? Do you want to force them? Or some people say, don't force anybody to do anything, let it happen on its own, or it's totally sad. Those kind of issues pop up now and 100 years ago in the situation I'm talking about. Because to the Orthodox German Jews, what I'm talking about, the Chadorah may have problems in terms of system and in terms of modern pedagogy and in terms of the measles, as I said before, but they inculcate emunah. You don't get that in schools in Germany or anywhere else. Jewish education, by the time you get to the First World War, generally speaking, is anti-fundamentalist. It's the problem of our Jewish people today. That's why you have the high rates of whatever you got. And these places are doing that. So it raises, of course, the question, as you see in this picture, right? Here's a Cheder. What's more important, hygiene or emunah? And it's if you're Sam Strayfield Hirsch, you'll say it's emunah. Now this is jarring to a Western ear. We have a different point of view than the Western point of view. That's what they'll say. We are Western, but that doesn't mean we have to go along with the crowd. We have a different point of view. We are selectively Western. We appropriate from Western culture. We do not surrender ourselves to Western culture because that would be pointless. Then we won't be Jewish. If you want to totally surrender yourself to Western culture, why don't you convert now and get it the heck over with? Right? So, having said that, deep down, if you know these people, these German Aguda types hope. They'll never say it, never do anything, but they cannot help but hope that one day soon, Polish and Lithuanian Jewry, on their own, organically, will see the superiority of the correct derech. Right? Because, let's face it, from their point of view, this is the perfect world. Right? Look at us. We are educated, we have degrees, we have professions, we're secular in business, and we're Shomer Shabbos. So it's a Hershey. But I'm not telling you that. It's just like these wonderful double entendres. Okay, now here we go. The Krauts had captured so much land, they had to divide us all up into two general zones, which happened to correspond to the two Jewish zones. One was Poland, one was Lithuania, which were two different types of Jews. The Poland was occupied and administered in German what they called the Gouvernement General, the general government. And when you talk about the general government, that's a term for the German occupied area of Poland. In the First World War and in Hitler's time also, he did the same thing. But in Hitler's time, it was all about killing all the Jews in Poland. In the First World War, it was not at all. Not at all. Okay? And the other half, Lithuania, is called Oberost, which is short for the Oberbefehlhaber der gesamten deutsches Streitkraft in der Osten, which of course means the supreme commander of the United German Armed Forces in the East. Right? Okay? So everybody the Germans call Oberost. So Hindenburg and Ludendorff, you read in all the books, they were in charge of Oberost. And afterwards, Hoffmann was in charge of Oberost, and so on and so forth. The Ober of the Ost. Okay? Which means that if you're Jewish, depending where you live, you got two different administrations to deal with. There's one entirely organization of administrative apparatus here, and there's another independent one here. This is run by these generals and stuff like that, doing that one, and theoretically should all be integrated, but it wasn't really. Now, this Oberbefehlshaber der deutsches gesamte Streitkraft in der Osten, we call Lita, okay? Right? This is Lithuania. Okay, let's go to the next one. Yeah, that's it. over here. Okay? Now, that's interesting because this is the reality of it. Poland is mostly Hasidic. Lithuania is mostly not Hasidic. I think everybody knows that. When the German army sets up the government general in Poland, it says we got a couple million Jews over here. So like any good organized system, I need a Jew expert. Because I'm a German general. I don't know this stuff. Let me get a Jew expert. Now, the problem with that is getting the right Jew expert. Oh boy, there's a dance. Each one said, me, right? Hindenburg and these guys can't help it. They pick basically the only Jew they know, which is a totally assimilated member of parliament who had, like Tinish Nishbe, knew nothing whatsoever about Judaism. Nice guy. We would call him today a democratic liberal in a good way. And that's what he was, Ludwig Haas. It's a famous, in German parliamentary history, he's very well known. You know the old story, the unknown soldier Goldberg. Right? As a tailor, he was very well known, but as a soldier, he wasn't. So here also, the unknown Jew, Ludwig Haas. As a German, he was very well known. As a Jew, not. But that's the only Jew they know. You get it? And so they appoint him as head of the advisor to the Governor General of Poland, General von Basler, Prussian general, the conqueror of Antwerp, real Prussian type, very intelligent guy. I told you they had brainiacs, right? They weren't dumb. And if his job is to administer Poland, he was the opposite of Hitler. You know? He said, what's the best way, like I told you before, using Machiavelli and Koheles to make all this work? Ludwig Haas, with the best of intentions, wants to totally reform and Germanize the Jews of Poland, because I'm doing him a favor. He doesn't get it. I'm doing a favor. So I order all the Hasidic groups to change their clothes now, all the cheder to close down, all the things to institute, public baths, get rid of the mikvahs. We don't need that. I know you're crying right now, but listen, when you take a little child says to the dentist, the kid doesn't want it either. But after it's all over, he's happy. That's how you see it over here. Okay? Now, and by the way, he's opposed to Zionism too. He's a German. So I don't want any Hebrew schools. This kind of German schools, like you have in Germany with an hour a day of religious studies or that kind of thing, the way they used to have it, and fine, Gemarnu. Now immediately the Agoratais, as soon as they found that it's Gewalt, and they go into heavy lobbying operation in their back door way, the Stadlonis, to try to get it to General von Basler. So here's how you do it. Here's the guy you want to get to. Here is Rosenheim, the Aguda leader. This is Zygmunt Frankl, the richest Jew in Munich, the head of the department stores in Munich, who's an Orthodox Jew, who's a from Jew, Zygmunt Frankl. Zygmunt Frankl, being a rich Jew in Munich, Munich is the capital of the Kingdom of Bavaria, which I told you yesterday was a separate state within Germany. He's very good friends with the Catholic Chancellor of Bavaria, which is Georg von Hertling, who later in the world became the Prime Minister of Germany. Okay? So he says to Hertling, can you get me in to see the Chancellor of the whole Germany, Bettmann Holweg, and tell him that I should be appointed as the representative to this guy? And it works. So it's a Rube Goldberg, but it works. Okay? This is what lobbyists do. You get to this guy who knows this guy. What's the other way of doing it, And so now you're going to have a situation in Germany, in Poland, I should say, in Warsaw, in which you have an official head of the Jewish section to advise the government. That's Ludwig Haas, who knows nothing about nothing. And now you have Zygmunt Frankl and Rosenheim and Rabbi Pinchas Cohn and the other guys. And they're going to be, I'll tell you, I'll know what happened. I'll just skip the notes. They immediately size up that this guy's not bad, he's just clueless. And so Rabbi Dr. Pinchas Cohn, who was a leading Orthodox rabbi, to the right of Hirsch. He thinks Hirsch is too modern because this term directly was made up. Jews in Germany are from because they've always been from, like that. But he's a PhD. He's Rabbi in Ansbach. And he buddies up with Ludwig Haas. And he sees the guy goes every morning from 8 to 9 for a walk, and he walks with him every day. And they talk about this, that, and the other. Sooner or later, they talk about Judaism. And before you know it, he's getting a one-man tutorial in Judaism. I never knew this. I never knew that. So if you read the memoirs of Rosenheim, he said, when I came there and I was on the train with Ludwig Haas, he gave me a whole lecture. This thing called Milchik and Fleischik. From Milchik to Fleischik, you can do right away. From Fleshik to Milchik, you have to wait 3 hours. Rosenheim said, oh, very interesting, So yeah, he got it. He's learning a little bit about what Judaism is, so don't think all these funny-looking people are like from Mars. They're not. They're actually keeping the culture your great-grandparents or whatever kept. That's what's happening over there. Now, the Aguda argument goes like this to the German army. We're the best partners for you. We are Orthodox, these guys are Orthodox. That's the essence of who they are. You just look around. You don't need me to give you a lecture about that. These Hasidic Jews, the Ger Hasidim and the others, they have nothing really in common with the assimilated Jews that you see yourself eating ham and whatever, Haas and these other guys. They're not even into Zionism. You can just look at them. You see what's happening, how they spend their day. We are the perfect bridge because we are German. We are loyal. We want Germany to beat Russia. That's not a lie. We want Germany to beat Russia. So when you're aside, we want to massage the situation to help the two sides get along as best as possible, and that whatever changes will inevitably occur within the Hasidic sector and the others will be painless, and when they're ready for it, and that kind of thing. And it's an interesting argument, isn't it? It's an interesting argument. When the other side, the Zionists and the seculars, say, don't listen to these guys, a bunch of frumocks and idiots, and don't listen to them. But it's hard to make the case that a guy with a PhD is like some crazy cretin, you understand? So it's a wonderful set of stories that I'm only touching upon tonight. Now, the Aguda types are disadvantaged vis-a-vis the Zionists, because the Zionists, as a famous historian said, had the mystique of being politicians, Medinaim, and the Aguda types were Stadlanim. It's a different type. If you do the type that I just said before, you're not a proud political leader. You are proud in your way, but you work behind the scenes. It's a certain way. These other guys, they were members of the World Zionist Organization. That was an international recognized group. They had contacts with governments around the world. They negotiated before the war with everybody. Theodor Herzl was received by the Pope, by the Tsar, by the German Emperor, all the rest of it. They are players. You frummies are not players. And they're trying to. Well, we are. So it's just interesting in that way, because if you want to, let's go to the next one. If you want to be treated like a diplomat, you have to dress that way. In the Gemara, it says, if you dress in a certain Roman fashion, oh, it's terrible sin. However, but there was a certain guy, they needed to be a ambassador of the Frum in Palestine to the Roman government. You dress like a Roman. You wear a komi, a toga around, you can cut your hair this way, and the heck with the payas and all the rest of it, because it's different. Shalbeis Rama Gamliel. Really, they only want people to speak Yiddish, or whatever the version of Yiddish was 2,000 years ago. But the base Rama Gamliel, they're in the Nasi. They have to deal with the Roman officials, all the rest of it. You guys can study Homer and Juvenal and all the rest of it, because you have to know the language. So it's very interesting, this idea that you have to get traction. In order to get traction, you got to look a certain way. Okay? So the Hasidim might say like this, I'm the Rebbe, I represent 50,000 people. You look like a shoeshine boy, They don't see it that way. Okay? So it's an interesting first world, third world kind of interplay that I'm discussing over here. On the other hand, the Oberost was quite aware that the Aguda types had the best relationships with the Hasidic masses. They weren't dumb. Indeed, immediately upon the German occupation of Poland in 1915, the Ger Rebbe, who is the big Rebbe, he had 100,000 followers in the First World War. Where I come from, that's a lot of people. Okay, wrote to the Orthodox groups in Germany, says, "Come and help us against these Ludwig Haas and other types that are going to come, and who knows what kind of a chorban they're going to make over here. Please, come and help us." Remember, you probably don't know, the Ger Rebbe and people like that had started to get out of the shell in the decade in the fin de siècle before the First World War. They wanted to compete with Zionism, and so already, for example, in 1909, there was a very famous meeting of the three camps, the Yekes, the Litvaks, and the Hasidim in Bad Homburg, which is 10, 12 miles away from Frankfurt. Some people know where it is. It's a big spa. And the there you had, the Telzerov, or Chaim Moshe Grushinsky from this group, and the Ger Rebbe from this group, and the Rabbi Breuer from this group, all trying to find some mutual language for political purposes, you see? And so the Ger Rebbe knows who's who in Germany. He's not, living on the moon. That's the funny part. You look at some of the Haredi leaders, you say, well, they don't know what's going on in the world. Actually, they know. I always try to tell it to my college classes when if you study Hasidism, looks like the Amish. I say, it's not the Amish. They look like the Amish. They're not the Amish. They know what's going on everywhere. Right? They do not reject science in terms of technology. They know what's happening in the White House before the news knows what's happening in the White House. You understand? They started meeting beforehand. The Aguda gets permission to send 2 official representatives. The German government says that you can send 2 guys to be full-time workers for the German army to represent the Aguda point of view, to hopefully help relations between the Haredim, as I would call them, and the German government in general. These 2 rabbis with PhDs are unusual types. First, you had this person I mentioned before, Rabbi Dr. Pinchas Cohn, okay, who publicly said Deutschland liberalis and privately said, that the Germans are mamash Amalek. It's a machlokes among the historians. The Bavarian historians say he was only referring to the Prussians. You understand? But a very, very interesting person. I can't go in the Torah Karta type, in his Hashkafa. Okay, when he moves to Palestine later on, he wants that meeting with the Arabs and see if they can work things out. Very intelligent person, and he's supposed to be the overall ambassador of the Aguda to the 2 parties, to the Hasidim and to the German army, with the consent of both. And the other person was a different type. Is an education specialist. It's Rabbi Dr. Emmanuel Karbach, who had been in Memel. Memel is actually part of Germany, which is Lithuanian, today called Klaipeda. It's on the border of Germany and Lithuania. So he's very familiar with the Ostjuden, as far as the German rabbis capable of being in the Kaiser's time. And he later was in Western Germany. He's going to try to help move the Hasidim in quote-unquote the right direction. Like I said before, I'm not telling you what to do, but, okay, I'm suggesting. And but he's a yeki, let's put it this way. We have his letters to his wife, which have been published in the Leobeck Journal, and they're wonderful. He says, I love my fellow Jews, but I put a sign in my room, no spittoons allowed. You understand? And he said, and the Polak cooking, my stomach was there. Because of the German, you're not used to it, So, anyway, as I told you before, Dr. Pinchas Cohn ends up influencing the Haas, the main guy. And thus, for example, this is a perfect example I'm talking about. The Germans will decree that all Jewish schools must now teach in German, like Moses Mendelssohn. But Pinchas Cohn says, fine, Yiddish is a variety of German. And the Germans said, okay. So that's how you go around all this. After all, if you admit the Yiddish variety of German, you extended the area of German culture very far. Okay. Now, the truth of the matter is, Yiddish to real German, they're like Jamaican, to a German, they go crazy. To us, we've grown up, we know the German, Yiddish. But if you were from Germany, it's a little weird. Anyhow, more than a little weird. Cohn even arranges for the Governor General to pay official visits to Ger Rebbe, which means that he's look what a smart guy Basler was. He said, I'm showing respect for your group, right? When it comes to how can I help you, it's a gesture, okay? Later on, he made another meeting to Chaim Brisker later on, 2 years later, to show it's also the Misnagdim, okay? There was a strange encounter, but the Ger Rebbe was very diplomatic. Anyhow, Emmanuel Karlbach, the other rabbi, who was an experienced educator, the Karlbachs actually specialized in setting up day schools in Germany. They were early pioneers of this. They all had doctorates in education-connected subjects in universities. Some had more than one PhD, more than one. And they already understood by the late 19th century, if you're a Hirschian, the most vital part of Hirschianism is the realization that you've been up day schools, it's over. Okay? Yeshivas they weren't into, but day schools they definitely were. And so he works to persuade the Hasidim little by little, okay, to exchange the Chadarim, the Cheders, with Haredi day schools. You run it, You control it, but I'm talking about things you never heard of. Trained teachers, organized curriculum, grades, classes, things like that. It's not treif, Here's what we do in Germany. You modify it any way you want. All the rest of it. There were 386 cheters in Warsaw, which means it was a hefkeris. You understand? And naturally, from a German point of view, even a German-Jewish point of view, 386 cheters equals 3 large, well-organized day schools. Or something like that, right? Doesn't it? With recess and open air, and as they say, trained teachers with something called textbooks, things that they never heard of. And the Ger Rebbe was not happy about this at all. He says, I still believe in Talmud Salafah, Talmud's baseball, and it's part of the warp and move of who we are. These debates have raged in Hasidic circles till today. And it's not always in favor of the one you imagine, you understand? And even in very, 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 very from literature circles, okay? You can ask him about it. Anyway, so here you have the beginnings of certain changes. The most controversial is, how about including a little bit, not a lot, a little bit of secular studies, right? Not a lot, and again, you control the teachers, you control the curriculum, you control everything, a little bit. And, it's like this. Like I said before, the Ger Rebbe's not sure, you sure, yeah, no, yeah. A lot of times they do what the Chassidim do, he promises to do it and do it, but no. This is 1915, 16, 17, 18. It's a very interesting time to be in Warsaw. The front is far away, but the education battles are right here. In Warsaw and throughout Poland, where there are millions of Jews, okay? And by the way, how does it say? As man goes, so goes the nation. As Ger goes, so go all the Polish Hasidim, by and large. They're the biggest group. You see? Now, what I'm talking with you about is the beginning of the day school concept and system, which will dominate Haredi Judaism for the next century. The world today is full of whole networks, the frum world, of day schools. Some have more secular studies, some have no secular studies or very little. Some are run, this way, some are run that way. But the day school model, I think, is universal. Certainly in America. And I think in Israel also. They have their own forms of it. Its origins, the original origins are in Germany, but it was spread out of Germany in the First World War in the context of what I'm talking about now. Okay? And after the war is over, the Ger Chassidim will indeed set up, believe it or not, a teacher's training program and some sort of curricular thing, and they will do it. They'll do it their way. Not the way they do it in Germany, not the way they would do it necessarily in the United States. It's not the Regents exam, but they'll do it in their way. Okay? Now, some of the super frum will oppose it. I'm talking about the mainstream. Then, this could not help but raise the taboo question, girls. What about schools for girls? Okay? The Hasidic and Haredi sensibilities by the fin de siècle, the period before the First World War, had led to a ridiculous situation. The daughters of economically middle-class Hasidic and Haredi families wanted and received modern educations in school and even gymnasiums in Europe, which means they're being inculcated in the Polish culture, in the German culture, in the Hungarian culture, and so forth. I mean, a gymnasium 100 years ago is not just about learning math and science. It's about giving you values. And there's something to being Polish. And there's even something to be Estonian, and whatever. And that's where the daughters of big rabbis and rebbes are going up here. And what about Jewish education? Chas v'shalom. This is a little counterintuitive. And anybody knows anything about the Hasidic world, for example, the Hasidic world in the late 1800s, early 1900s knows you met the Rebbe, but then you met his daughters, and you were shocked. The daughters can speak French. They don't dress like the other Hasidic women. Now they have a sheitel, but they dress in a Paris fashion. In fact, you'll see fashion journals in the Chorka Rebbe's house, and so on and so forth. And in Lithuania, Kal v'chomer, and so forth. My father's from Minsk, which will play a role in the First World War. And the rabbi in Minsk was Rebbe Lezer Rabinovich, one of the Gedolei Ador. Really, the Gedolei Ador. And my father told me. And his daughter went to school, the gymnasium. And the non-Jewish maid carried the books on Shabbos. That's how you do it. This is life once upon a time. Okay? So this resulted in girls who were distinctly Europeanized in thought, dress, attitudes, and every other way, but they then are married off to Hasidim. And that was the system. So it was like crazy. And here comes Rabbi Karlbach and so I guess, well, in Germany they have a thing called schools for girls, Jewish schools, Orthodox Jewish schools. Okay? And here begins, before Sarah Schneer, the girls' schools. Everybody knows about Sarah Schneer, and I don't want to take anything away from her and all that, but that's actually after the war, the end of the war and after the war. And the whole thing really starts under the German military zone with these German rabbis who set up schools. The first school is called Chavetz Salas, right? Isn't that interesting? And in Warsaw, and it's run in Hersheyan fashion. So everybody's very good secular education, very good lofty, idealistic Jewish education, and was schlecht. You understand? In general, look, there could not fail to make an impression on the Hasidim to see these weird Martians, the Yekes. They're genuinely from. I'll tell you again, these guys. So Dr. Cohen was walking with a German general. Then he's like this. I got a daven mincha, and he rubs his hand on the grass. He said, and the German says, "Is this a pagan custom or something?" He said, "No, you have to wash your hands before you daven mincha." And he waits for him to daven mincha. Right? It's interesting. So they see genuinely from people. That's an understatement, but they're modern looking in sense of Western European standards, right? In dress and taste. And this could not help but open Hasidic minds to some extent to selective appropriation of Torah Americans of Hershey. Selective appropriation. And I can't emphasize, it's hard for me to do to an audience like this, how wide the gap was between different Jewish communities prior to the First World War. You just didn't see other people, unlike yourself usually. And there's exceptions, of course. But then, if you live in Lithuania, all you saw is people like that. You live in Galicia, all you saw is people like that. You live in Germany, all you saw is people. You knew there were people elsewhere, but you didn't see them, right? Except the rare occasions. And the wars, they're andromusi, as they call it. It's all bringing everybody together in these interesting ways. In addition to questions of chinuch, there's the questions of politics. It was soon clear that one day, Germany and Austria are going to set up some kind of a Polish state. The two emperors proclaimed that there'll be a kingdom of Poland revived. Of course, they meant a Poland totally subservient to Germany, and I won't go into all that. But nevertheless, the Polacks said, I guess, there's going to be Poland tomorrow. Let's get ready for it. The first rule is everybody has to speak Polish or something like that. You know what I mean? Knows where do Jews fit into that? Where do Jews fit into that? There's a large population in New Poland. If it was 10 or 20,000 Jews, no problem. There's a couple million. So the Jews are more than 10%. I repeat, more than 10%. That's a big minority. How do you fit them into here? And they're Hasidic too. They're not Polish, you know what I mean? They're Jewish Jews. So how are you going to fit them into New Poland? There are two possibilities to go. If you're the Poles and the Germans in 1916, there are two possibilities. One is what I call the cultural Zionist way, Horace Callan. In other words, special status and treatment. There'll be a Poland, but the Jewish minority will be given full legal rights to conduct a parallel universe. Their own schools. Of course, they'll be loyal politically to the state, but they'll run a completely Jewish thing from K through PhD. That sort of business. That's the Zionist demand. And then you have the Aguda demands that says that's ridiculous. It's a recipe for disaster. The Poles will go crazy if you try to ram that down their throats. Instead, what we should have is just equal rights for everybody, and just have a really democratic state in which everybody can do whatever they want, and then we'll lobby the Polish government to benevolently let the Jews live their own lives, as they wish. Knowing what we know about Poland and Jews today, I don't know if either was realistic, but let's face it, it's 1916. What do you propose? These are the only two possibilities. But that's the Aguda, because they're anti-Zionist, they're anti-cultural Zionists, and they say, why provoke the Goyim in a way like this? Because nothing is going to be a red flag for the Poles, like what I just said. You can understand it. Americans wouldn't tolerate it. We freak out if the Spanish now say we want to have their own schools, their own culture, and this and that and the other. Would it be a state within a state? Interestingly, by the way, at the end of the war, when World War I is over, American Jewry takes over, not German Jewry. The Germans lost. The American Jews will ram this down the throat of the Poles. That's the famous Louis Marshall, head of the American Jewish Committee, the leading Yid of 100 years ago, one of the most eminent attorneys in the United States, and it was a reformer, a great champion of Jewish civil rights, And he goes to Europe with Woodrow Wilson, and he said like this: no state, including Poland, is going to be recognized as a state and enter the League of Nations unless they sign on the dotted line what's called the Minority Rights Treaty, in which every minority, including the Jews, have the right to everything I just said. And all these countries will do it, holding their nose and protesting, and they won't really honor it, will they? They won't really honor it. Only Czechoslovakia. All the other countries will not honor it because it was done kaflam harkagigas. Nobody wants to do that. So, but anyway, in addition to, as part of these political moves, Rabbi Cohen and his colleagues work on political conscience raising among the masses. The Hasidim, until now, as they said before, they said to the non-from you representative, you do this, that, and the other. They said, no, you want people to look like you, because the others won't really represent you well. Right? It's a development of the utmost significance, because until now, they had not thought themselves as in Haredi in the sense of the modern term political identity. When we today, you see in the paper, people use the term Haredi Judaism, they mean a self-aware, politically active identity. A Haredi Jew is not just a Jew like when I was a kid who was a Shomer Shabbos somewhere, and that's that has nothing to do with any other part of his life. Atlanta born, Atlanta bred, and when you die, Atlanta dead. You live your whole life in that world, and you vote for if you're a Haredi in Israel, you vote for the Haredi party, and all the rest, that's the newspaper you read, and so on and so forth. That is a matter of political conscience raising. In plain terms, no more non-from politicians to patronizingly represent the from Jews. From now on, grassroots political organizing, which ought to be not hard for Hasidim, because all the Rebbe just give the word, and there you have it. No more Jewish Times, right? We want the Atei Naman and the Hamodia, because the Jewish Times don't represent us. You see? Hopefully that means, however, that means the Ger Rebbe has to lift the ban when reading newspapers. Because you're Hasidic before the First World War, who reads a Zeitung, shake it, right? But now, no, by the Hamodia, So that, without meaning it, modernizes the Hasidim, because now you become part of a larger world out there, even if you're getting them from a very jaundiced point of view. But now you're part of the European culture, of the newspapers, and everything that's going around there. That's how change happens in an unchanging culture. Okay, now let me turn to Lithuanian Oboros, because the hour's late, which is a different area, a different zone, right? And here it's controlled not by the German generals I spoke about before, by the famous commander Prince Leopold of Bavaria, is well known to you, I'm sure, who was the successor of Hindenburg in the Eastern Front. Wait a minute. If he's Prince Leopold of Bavaria, then he knows Hertling. And if he knows Hertling, then they know Sigmund Frankl. Sigmund Frankl knows Rosenheim. So once again, you're going to have Orthodox Jewish representatives on the German general staff. You understand? That's how it works. And they will therefore appoint, instead of Ludwig Haas as the top Jew, they'll appoint an Orthodox Jew, Hermann Struck, I mentioned before. Maybe that name doesn't mean anything to you, but long ago it did. He was a very famous world artist. Etchings. You understand? He studied in Italian art school. I mean, he was a top-level person. Here, look at some, right? It's impressive. These are pictures he makes, there's Einstein, of course, there's Rabbi Akiva Eger. Here's a Jewish girl in Poland, a Jew in Poland. All of a sudden, they don't look so dirty and dingy. Now, I'm serious. He's famous for that. Capturing the human beneath the surface, right? Here's my favorite. There's Reb Chaim Brisker, right? I can't imagine that Reb Chaim Soloveitchik sat for a portrait, but it probably took a minute. So I want you to understand the wonderful situation over here. Here's the top dog German Jew, who's the equivalent of a general in charge of all the Jewish affairs, who's going to Minsk, and wants to meet Reb Chaim Brisker. I said, can I paint your picture over here? And what time is Mincha? It's just a very interesting set of situations. Now, as I said before, Lithuania is different. Most Jews are observant, but they're not Orthodox. They're traditionalistic. They don't have that sensibility that I talked about before. And they won't pick that up till after the Second World War, I think. That's happened in your lifetime and mine. The Orthodox types are the Rosh Hashivas. They all ran away with the Great Retreat that we talked about yesterday. Either they're forced out of it, so there's nobody left in Lithuania of that sort, hardly. The Haskalah and cultural Zionism, although small in numbers in Lithuania, are young and dynamic. Many from Jews are sympathetic to these cultural trends. These are your religious Lithuanian Jews who say, what's wrong with Achanam? What's wrong with Bialik? What's your problem? You understand? What's wrong with Zionism? So it won't be 100% religious state. Oh, we'll work on that. What's your problem? You say it's a different attitude, okay? And you can't say this rabbi said this and that, because Litvaks don't hold from that business. What does that rabbi know? It's unthinkable in the Hasidic context. In the Lithuanian context, he's a big scholar, but he doesn't know politics. That's how they talk. So, and there's no Hasidism to speak of substantially in Lithuania. Here they appoint a different rabbi to be the educational advisor, someone you never heard of, Rabbi Leopold Rosenek. Okay? You can see over here, Pressburger Yeshiva, you understand? Rabbi Doctor, German University. All the rest is the rabbi in Bremen, where all the ships used to go out of, which was not a frum community, but an Orthodox rabbi, which is interesting. So he has to make the mikveh, he has to, all that sort of thing. And a good Jew, he gets along tight with General Ludendorff. How did he get along with Ludendorff? The first thing he does is he sets up a soup kitchen for the hungry refugees walking by, brings in all the press. And he says, this is the Ludendorff soup kitchen. Okay? And Ludendorff, that proto-Nazi in his autobiography, says, when I was in Lithuania, the Jews set up the Ludendorff soup kitchen, right? And he knows how to do the trick, okay? Now, and he gets on very tight with Max Hoffman, because they were two very smart fellows. You understand? Hoffman, I told you before, was a genius. So one of the first things he does is like this: you want to bring back life to normal in this country and bring it, you have to reopen the Slobodka Yeshiva, right? Which everybody run away from, but there were still some students running around now. There's an empty building. If you will show that Germany respects the Jewish religion, this will have a very powerful positive impact on the masses, and they will all want to support Germany. And so Prince Leopold of Bavaria and General Max Hoffman, they'll all come and have a ribbon cutting ceremony for the reopening of the Slobodka Yeshiva, I kid you not, in late 1915, I think, or early 16, and Rabbi Rosenek gives a whole speech. We want to thank the Kaiser of Germany, and I can really say the blessing, Asher Cholach Michvodo Labosav Adam, which he translated in German, that praises God who gives his greatness to his majesty the emperor, who opened up the Slobodka Yeshiva for the Lithuanian Jews. Okay? Now, you won't read a bit of this, as I told before, in the Jewish Times in America. You understand? They control the news, as I said, the fake news. You'll read that the Germans are torturing the Jews and all this kind of business, and so on and so forth. Just be aware of this. Just be aware of this. Rosenek brings in his brother-in-law. He married a Karlbach girl. So he brings in brother-in-law, Yosef Karlbach, who later was a rabbi in Hamburg, a very famous person, who's an educationist. He used to run the schools in Eretz Yisrael and Petach Tikva. Again, he actually had two PhDs, one in math and one in something else, and to set up a gymnasium and a day school system in Kovna, the capital city. Though a talented educationist, he can't control the institution. He sets up a whole school for girls. You don't see too many Orthodox rabbis sitting like this now in Beis Yaakov, right? And he was a frum guy. But wait a second. Wait a second. They're not all frum. It's Lithuania. They tell the Germans that we're happy you set up the school, all the rest of it, but you don't tell us how to run it. Well, yes, I do. Okay, I know you don't. The classes are going to be in German. No problem. They're all in Ivrit. You understand? And he says, it has to be in an Orthodox spirit. No problem. It's not. You get it? This Lithuania, it's not the Ger Rebbe. It's not Hasidic territory. And so it's very, very interesting. And he loses control of the school within the first year. And he said the only way to do it is raise money in Germany and set up what you and I would call an Orthodox school for boys and girls. A gymnasium, by the way, is a BA, correct? In Europe, that's when you graduate from gymnasium, it's like the 13th or 14th grade, and you finish college. You can go to grad school. Maybe you don't know that. Gymnasium is 14 or 15 grades, I forget which, and it's tough. And then you go to grad school. So we're talking about advanced, stuff over here. And he's an expert on the curriculum and all that kind of business. He sets up money stuff. That's a very interesting story. He raises the money in Germany, sets up his own school. This is Yavna. This is how Yavna started. Because he calls the school Yavna. And afterwards, he leaves behind in Lithuania this system that he set up, which the Orthodox rabbis and types will adopt in Lithuania. There is no Beis Yaakov. in the Republic of Lithuania. That something happens in the Republic of Poland, but not Lithuania. Instead, you have a separate system called Yavna with a much better English department, to use American terminology, but also a very frum, we don't have this in America, a very frum and cultured Jewish education as well, because that's what you got to do if you want to compete against the others. So once again, the First World War leads to the most unusual kinds of business. This school kept on being called the Karlbach Gymnasium, but if you look it up online, you'll see Karlbach Gymnasium, they're all without Yamkas, they're all not from, this, that, and the other, because they called it after he started it, but that's not the school that he ran, not really. And so Yavna, as they say, will grow after the war. In Vilna, I'm almost at the end. I cannot forbear to share with you just one last piece, and that is, Vilna is the other big city. And, you can imagine what a churban is there, the refugees coming in and out, all the rest of it. And half the population was kicked out by the Russians. Reb Chaim Meiser was on a hit list for the Kazakhs. He fled, like the first or second day of the war, because they're going to kill him, as we were talking about yesterday, you understand, as a spy. And this is Russia. First, they arrest you, then they shoot you, then they bury you, then they have the trial, and then you're found guilty. That's how it works over there. And if you think that's over, what happened to Morsi yesterday? Okay? Except they screwed up. They should have waited till the trial was over, But anyway, and so what happens over here? A remarkable couple takes over. There was the young Rabbi Rubinstein, right? Who was in Slobodka Yeshiva, but also was atypical, because somehow, I don't know how he did this, but on the side he went to the university and he got a law degree. I just can't imagine how he did that in Slobodka, because he got it from the University of Moscow, and that makes no sense to me. But obviously he's an unusual type of guy. He's a frum guy, he knows how to learn and all that kind of stuff, and he marries probably the most remarkable girl of the time, Esther Flensburg Rubinstein now, a famous name once upon a time. And she's the daughter of the Rabbi Shaki, Chaim Yirmiyahu Flensburg, who I encountered first as writing this extensive commentary on Chazai Kreskes, which is by far the hardest Jewish philosophy book by far of the Middle Ages. It makes the Rambam look like a first grade stuff. And this guy's a ex-Volozhin guy, so he's obviously a Moscow. Now he's very frum, but in the sense that I spoke about before, he has a very broad horizon, and he teaches his daughter like Yentl. You see? She's probably very bright. He taught her whole Shas, I don't know what else. But she's very frum. So it's very, very interesting. I spoke about this in Tina. She's very, very interesting, this Esther Rubinstein, because before the war, very tznius, you know what I mean? In other words, totally in the background, all the rest of it. The war comes, you have a crisis. People are dying. Refugees are coming all the time. How do you raise food? How do you support this person? There's a rabbi without food. There's an orphan, all the rest of it. And she discovers herself. And next thing you know, she's head of this committee and member of that committee and running this and running that and all the rest of it, simply because it's the war and it's got to be done. So the husband was what you call Rav Mitam. When he went into the rabbinate, so it was open to the position of chief rabbi of Vilna. And he said, I guess, Vilna? Vilna did not have an official rabbi since the time of the Vilna Gaon because of some political problems they had back then. But it's early 19th century. Actually, in the 19th century itself, the Russian government insisted that every city has to have a government-appointed rabbi with a secular education. By definition, all the great rabbanim have a secular education. So this is called the Rav Mitam, you understand? Every city in Russia, this is just screwball, had an official rabbi and then the real rabbi. I'll give you an example. You've heard of Kovna. So you never heard of the chief rabbi of Kovna because the chief rabbi of Kovna was a pharmacist. You have heard of the guy who was paid on the books as the salter of the meat. It's a Kolchan inspector. This is how the system worked. You understand? So by early 20th century, the frum didn't like this. And so when the last guy left office, they said to this guy, I don't know how you did it, but you got a degree. And you're frum, so you take the job. You understand? So he was the official rabbi of Vilna, even though he wasn't Chaim Meiser. And he works miracles. The Russians were going to shoot everybody. He goes to General Alexeyev and talk them out of it. You understand? Lots of times people are going to be hanged. He walks in and talks them out of it. He's quite a guy. This is why he was elected later on when he ran against Chaim Meiser for the official job in the 1920s, because he had a lot of IOUs. If you saved my son, I'm voting for you. I don't want to hear the Chavetz Chaim, kind of business. If you saved my husband, I don't want to hear this good stuff. This is how it went. So this couple moved mountains, and she sets up a whole network of girls' schools, something along the lines of the Yavna. She was a brilliant, but then as soon as the war was over, like in 1920, she came down with some degenerative disease, a kidney something or other like that, and she died 3 years later in Germany, in Berlin. There was a big hesped for her from the 3DH, Shlomo Weinberg, because they all viewed her as the model woman. Very brilliant and very tznius. It's interesting kind of person. There's a book this thick after that. And it means that the First World War crisis produced all kind of people that ordinarily would have had retiring lives, but because people are starving in the streets, and you got to get the money together, you got to get food, you got to get people out of the army, you got to save somebody from the firing squad and rescue somebody from the jail and all the rest. Somebody's got to do it. And you can't say you're too short, you're too young, you're a man, you're a woman, this and the other. All hands on deck. All this is part of the Jewish experience, as I say before, in World War I. Let me just conclude by saying she sets up a big gymnasium, but she died, so it became Nafrum. So you can meet a lot of Polish, Lithuanian Jews who say, I learned in Esther Rubinstein. It was excellent school, all the rest of it. And it was, but it was not what she intended. Which means that any chance for a vibrant, frum, non-Haredi school system failed. This actually redounded to the interests of the right wing. So look how the politics of the First World War ended up. There's a lot here, but I think it's too late, so I'll stop for tonight. Good night.